Now it's time to get to the part of the program that I like best, and y'all will probably like best too. It's the time that I get to sit down and shut up and let somebody else talk. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. He's here to tell us about his family's struggles over the past 40 plus years to restore his family's ranch to the condition it was over 200 years ago. Please help me to welcome representing the Colonel Burns Ranch 2012 Lone Star Land Steward Award winner, Dr. Paul Burns.
As Jimmy said, we won the Lone Star Land Steward Award, and Texas Parks and Wildlife did a short video that I'd like to show you of our ranch. Go ahead.
The ranch was founded in 1873 by my great-grandfather, and I grew up on the ranch. When my ancestors settled the ranch, it was deeded from the state, so we were the first to live on the ranch. The folk stories that come down from them was that the Spanish Springs was a very old spring and dated back to Spanish times. It wasn't until we started this restoration work that the springs started flowing all over the ranch. About 40 years ago, we decided that we would totally restore the ranch. The grasses, the plants, the soil, in every one of the houses. This house, it was falling down, roof was off, and it was either let it deteriorate or restore it, and we decided as a family to completely restore it.
The Colonel Burns Ranch is a close neighbor to the Muse Wildlife Management Area. It actually surrounds us on 3 sides. And we really feel that's a win-win situation for both Texas Parks and Wildlife and also the Burns family. The land had been severely overgrazed, and they recognized that immediately. Paul, this habitat in here really looks good. They decided to start from the ground up with true restoration for all species here on the area.
Looks different than it did.
It really looks great. They've pushed a lot of brush from the area, and they've come back in and hand reseeded native grasses.
Side oak grama, big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, and Indian grass.
Dr. Burns has always been a meticulous record keeper, and that's important for managing wildlife and habitat.
Documentation is everything. It's probably my background in medicine in that it's very detailed and you've got to know what happens with every patient.
Photos can dramatically show you the changes in the ranch, the dirt to the beautiful grass.
You can't imagine what it was when we started 40 years ago. There was huge areas of bare ground, no native grass, not a sprig of tall grass when we started this project. And now we have native tall grasses.
It's really been amazing how the Colonel Burns Ranch fared through this last drought. Because of the excellent native grassland, native prairie restoration that's taken place here, water infiltration has really increased.
This is one of the many springs that we have on the ranch. We've fenced this off to protect it from the cattle. The spring even ran all during the drought last year.
They have very little runoff. That water is getting down into the ground, and that provided a great source of water for the wildlife.
We were really scared that the ranch would suffer last year, but it was an education to us. And that what we were doing, there must be some benefit to it. Our grass was good, our springs continued to flow, and I don't think we lost a single tree. Growing up on the ranch and seeing how hard my mother and father worked, I think they would be very pleased to see what we've done with the ranch.
It smells wonderful. We feel very blessed to have this ranch for however short of time that we have it, and to try to honor it and to honor what everyone did before us.
We see it as a vast ecological symphony that's constantly changing, and every part of the symphony is important, and every plant and animal on this ranch is important. I see myself as like a conductor. I just guide the parts of the ranch toward the native things and toward 1873, the way it was before it was settled.
Robbie Hoffman, directors, Jimmy Chambers, and everyone from Central Texas Farm Credit. Thank you for asking me to talk about our ranch and our family. I'd like to first to introduce my family. Our ranch is owned independently by each family member, although we organize it and are operated as a unit. It's individually owned. As you all know, that nothing happens on a ranch unless your wife agrees with you. My wife, Tony, is over here in the red. My brother and his wife, Pierce and Reba, Todd and Liz, Marietta and Albert, and Annie. And then also at our table is Deanna and Devin Erkslaven. Deanna will perform in a few minutes. Deanna is classically trained in voice. She studied and starred in several of the lyric productions here in Austin. Particularly the one that I liked the best was she was Annie Oakley and Annie Get Your Gun. Teaches private piano and voice, and she teaches at the college and university level. It's really a treat and an honor to get to talk to you today, because you care about our country, you care about our land, you're the landowners, and you're the ones that make it possible for people to own land. I congratulate you. You're America, and you're Texas. Our family has strong ties and very fond memories of our connection to the Federal Land Bank, which of course is now the Central Texas Farm Credit. My father was head of the Brownwood office of the Federal Land Bank beginning in the 1940s. It was a perfect fit. He knew everyone in the county, and he surely knew farming and ranching. He would be very pleased that you asked me to tell about the ranch today. His whole life went into the ranch. A few days before he died, we were talking at the Brownwood Hospital, and I asked him if he had ever foreclosed on anybody. He frowned and he said, yes, he did once. He said the man was a good man, and he was really just trying to feed his family. And I hated to foreclose on him, but he had sold some mortgage cows, he lied to me, and he wouldn't pay what he owed. Said I hated to do it, but I didn't really have any choice. 50 years later, it still bothered him. And I vividly remember going to my banker 40 years ago to borrow some money. And he said, sure, I'll loan you the money, because I know you'll pay it back. But what you're doing with this money is a dumb idea. And 40 years later, I really appreciate his honesty. And this is to say that all who work for the Central Texas Farm Credit, you're really like my father. You help people make their lives better. You get them out of a bind. You guide them with your judgment. And your act of honesty and kindness is remembered for the rest of your life. I practiced medicine and surgery in Austin for 30 years, and I had as busy a surgical practice as anyone in the state of Texas. But I knew in my heart that my wonderful surgical team operating with me made it all possible. Debbie Lane and Jerry Baker and I could operate for hours on a complicated case and never say a word, and everything went with absolute perfect precision day after day. And that's the same with you. It's true to you too. Now, my wife has a very perceptive saying, life changes in ordinary moments. You're just going along in an ordinary day, doing the best you can, and then in an instant, your life changes. Often it's completely out of your control. In 2 ordinary moments in our family, serendipity struck, and our life took a turn. One ordinary day in the office, I saw a CEO of a large corporation who had lived all over the world. At the end of the visit, I asked him if he had any advice for me, my daughter, whose husband worked for ExxonMobil and had lived all over the world. And he thought about it seriously for a minute, and in that ordinary moment, my life took a turn. He said, yes, provide a place your grandchildren can call home. No matter what happens, marriage, career change, move to a different city, move to a different country, no matter where they are in the world, when they get back, it's home. My wife and I talked about it and decided that the ranch would be that place. Then serendipity struck again after I retired and we were visiting our daughter in London. And we visited the poet William Blake's grave. And then in that ordinary moment as a tourist, Tony read the words from William Blake's Auguries of Innocence carved on a large stone. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Tony said, that's the ranch. That's what I want to do with it, and that's where I want to devote my energies and my resources. Again, life changes in an ordinary moment. And for the first time, we could clearly see what we wanted to do with the ranch and why, and we decided to absolutely go all in. Now, Brown County is in our family blood. We all grew up here, graduated from Blanket Elementary, Brownwood High School. Our family came here in 1873, and for almost a century and a half, our ranch was a cow-calf, sheep, farming operation. Our ranch is 6,000 acres. It's 13 miles straight north of Brownwood, right out 183 on the Cisco Highway. And 142 years later, our ranch won the Lone Star Land Steward Award as one of the best ranches in the state in conservation and restoration. Keeping a ranch in the family for 7 generations is a feat. Tony named the ranch the Colonel Burns Ranch, but after you hear a bit about his wife, Sarah, maybe the Sarah Burns Ranch would be better. We always tend to report history from a man's perspective, but I believe that the woman's perspective of the Colonel Burns gives a lot more insight, and you will see what I mean. Life changes in an ordinary moment, and our ranch has constantly changed for 144 years. The land has changed. Society has changed. How families live has changed. Our ranch was not passed from generation to generation by gifting or inheritance, but each generation worked hard, saved their money, bought land from their parents, inherited some, bought back land that was lost by prior generations. 5 generations of savings have gone into our ranch. Colonel Simon Pierce Burns founded the ranch in 1873. He was born in 1834, ran away from home in Missouri when he was 10, possibly to escape an abusive father. Never saw his family again. At age 14, he then turned up in Collin County, Texas, finished grade school, soon got married to his wife, Sarah. He was uneducated, but his wife, Sarah, was educated, and she taught him at night. He volunteered for the Army in 1860 as a private at 25 years of age, and in 3 years he was a general commanding 3,000 infantrymen. After the war, he was elected sheriff of Collin County, but then was removed during Reconstruction, along with the governor and state and county officials. Sarah, his wife, developed an overwhelming eye infection in both eyes, probably from the same virus that causes shingles, herpes zoster. Both eyes ruptured and drained pus for the rest of her life. Then in a covered wagon, they brought 7 children to Brown County to start all over again. And with a loan, they bought a small piece of land 13 miles north of Brownwood, where our ranch is today. He cleared some land for farming, studied law at night, took and passed the bar, became an attorney, did the same as a surveyor, and surveyed much of the land in that area. He was elected to the House of Representatives twice. All the while, Sarah, his wife, took care of now 8 children alone on the frontier. Then on a beautiful spring day in 1898, Sarah and the children were going through an ordinary day, and a man came riding up to the house and said Colonel Burns was dead. He was campaigning for the Senate in Granbury, ate supper at the hotel, said he didn't feel good, retired to his room, and they found him dead the next morning. When I think I have it tough, I think of Sarah Burns, blind with 8 children, alone on the frontier. Then on an adjoining ranch, my great aunt on my grandmother's side was going about her chores on an ordinary summer day, and her husband said that they needed to go to town to get some supplies. Saddled his horse, rode off to the east, and the family never saw him again. No goodbye, no mention of where he was going or that he was leaving at all. A lone woman abandoned on the frontier with a house full of kids to feed and take care of. Life really does change in ordinary moments. The Depression of 1901 was tough, and they had to sell a large portion of the ranch to pay expenses. Tony and I purchased back that part in 1998, 97 years after it was lost. The family pulled out of the Depression of 1901. 2 glorious decades followed in the 20s. The ranch expanded from Brown into Comanche County to South Texas and up into Kansas, a huge successful operation. My grandfather and Uncle Billy Burns owned most of it. Then on an ordinary day on the ranch, Uncle Billy's wife, Lula, saddled up her horse, went out looking for turkey eggs for supper. At dark, her horse came back alone. All night the men searched, and early the next morning they found her dead in the pasture. Uncle Billy's life was never the same. Life changes in an ordinary moment. Then in October of 1929, everybody's life changed. My mother said that the worst day of her life was in 1934, when the government came to the ranch and shot all the cows, except the milk cows. It was the depth of depression. The government thought that they could increase the price of cattle by killing them, decreasing the numbers. A lifetime of building up cattle, all lost in one day. Much of the ranch was also then lost during the Depression. Mother told me that one of the best memories of her life happened during the Depression when she was pregnant with me. It was unusually hot in August of 1938. Mother was sitting on a table under a shade tree, trying to keep cool, 8 months pregnant. Daddy had been working repairing fences about a mile away, and in that ordinary moment, in a blistering Texas summer day, she saw Daddy shirtless, riding his horse hard to the ranch. She immediately thought, please, God, I can't take any more. What's wrong? An old ice truck had gotten lost and couldn't find its way back to town. He stopped and asked Daddy for help and offered to pay Daddy for the help. But Daddy said no, but he sure would like some ice. He'd never had any ice on the ranch. He chipped off some ice. Daddy wrapped it in his shirt and took it to Mother. They made some iced tea, sat on the table, held hands, and drank the best glass of iced tea that she said that she ever had in her life. And 50 years later, tears came to her eyes when she told me that story. People who think keeping a ranch in the family is easy, maybe they should have talked to my mother. The Depression wore on. Family couldn't pay the notes to the ranch. It was scheduled for sale on the courthouse steps on the south side. Family had arranged a partial loan to save part of the ranch. As the family waited at the designated place where the auction always took place, with money to buy part of it back, the ranch was secretly sold on the north side, and the buyer and the judge immediately got in their car and left town. In a moment, most of the ranch was lost. Life does change in ordinary moments. My father and mother devoted their lives and their labor to save the rest of the ranch. I've never seen anyone work harder and complain less than my father. Responsibility was solely theirs, and they did it. Then in the 1970s, Pearson Reba, my brother and sister-in-law, now Margaret and Fred, my sister and her husband then, Tony and I realized it was our time. We decided to reaccumulate the ranch the family had lost in the 1900s and the 1930s. We each poured all that we could save into the ranch, and it was a sacrifice. In the financial crisis of 1985, Tony and I could not make our payments on our part of the ranch. I called the man I bought it from who held the note and explained my problem to him. And he said very simply, if I didn't make the payments on time, he would foreclose on the ranch. So Tony and I put everything we owned up for sale, including her lovely house in Lockhart. Just before the note was due, we sold part of the ranch, less than we'd paid for it 12 years before, and the Lockhart house for half what we paid for it, but we had enough money to make the payments on time. When we decided to go all in and completely restore the ranch, we decided to use as our benchmark the late 1840s, before cattle and before settlers, knowing that we could never restore a ranch back to the 1840s, but that would always be our goal and our benchmark. I began by trying to improve the ranch with the usual measures. Ranch had always been a cow-calf operation, and we realized it had been overstocked for decades. So we reduced the cattle stocking rate, rotated the pastures so the grass would have periods of growth after intensive grazing, moved invasive cedar and mesquite. It all helped. There was some improvement, but slowly I realized that it was not going to restore the land the way I envisioned. The amount of money that you can spend on a ranch this size is almost unlimited. It's horribly expensive to do what we're doing. So we have to spend our money wisely so that every dollar we put into the ranch really increases the value of the ranch. So about 30 years ago, I decided I just needed to stop all work on the ranch, step back, educate myself, and develop a simple overall plan to guide everything that I did on the ranch. So I stepped back for several years and just studied and planned. I studied the ranch, took every course I could find at A&M, went to the King Ranch many times, took courses in botany at the University of Texas, visited many of the best ranches in Texas and in the country, took maybe 100 courses. Asked Texas Parks and Wildlife, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service to evaluate the ranch and then to evaluate it regularly as we progressed. The next thing I did, though, turned out to be unique. I do not know of anyone who's approached restoration this way. I read every original journal that I could find of the descriptions of the early explorers before land was settled. And to my surprise, land has changed constantly due to human influence from around 13,000 years ago right up to the present. So I realized that any period I took from 13,000 years ago to the present, our ranch would look different. And so I needed to just pick an arbitrary date as a benchmark to restore the ranch toward. Then I made a fundamental decision. Many managers manage their land for something specific, and it's logical: hunting, quail, deer, exotics, cattle, recreation, photography, something. But when you do that, you define at the start what your land will look like and what plants and animals and what ecosystem will be favored. If you decide for manage for deer, it's going to look different than if you manage for cattle or for quail or for recreation. I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to try and bring back the entire ecosystem: soil, water, native plants, native animals, back as close to the way they were in 1840 as possible. So what have we done to recreate the prairies of the 1840s? Now, my goal has never been to remove mesquite and cedar, but my goal is to recreate the old-growth forest of 200 years ago. So I remove the young mesquites and leave the mesquite trees that are 70 years old and older, and leave them in irregular mottes along the streams and the gullies, just like they were in the 1840s, with these large areas of prairie in between the irregular mottes of the mesquites and the cedar. And then I plant the native tall prairie grass, just like it was in the 1840s. And now I have vast prairies of Indian grass, switchgrass, big blue stem, little blue stem, and cytogramma. We restored and protected the springs all over the ranch, riparian areas along the stream's banks and the banks of the gullies. When we started, we had large areas of bare soil. Now our soil is covered with organic material to prevent erosion and compaction, and let the rainwater infiltrate into the soil to water our plants and nourish our springs. We restore the soil, limit compaction, stop erosion, provide the ideal conditions for soil bacteria and fungi that's essential for our grasses and forbs. When I do this, I personally walk with the dozer operator all the time. I never let any type of heavy-duty operator on the ranch unless I'm with them personally every minute they're there. Tell them which tree to remove, which ones to leave, and then I immediately plant tall native grasses in every disturbed area and any time we disturb soil on the ranch. Terribly expensive, it's labor-intensive, but it will recreate that old-growth forest in only about 30 years if you start with 70-year-old trees. So the family restored everything on the ranch. 7 houses, the old historic barns, all the grasses to native grass, trees, springs, to beautiful tall grass prairies with tall native grass and huge native trees scattered in open prairies and mottes of dense brush along the streams and springs flowing all year long. There's wildlife everywhere. Birds, insects, flowers, quiet and isolated, and I think it's a paradise. So 2 ordinary moments. First, we decided to make a common home for all the family, an anchor, a place to enjoy, a refuge for our family, a peaceful place to restore the soul as we've restored the land. And secondly, as you study Blake's poem and try to understand the ranch, you study and try to understand the world. You can take a ranch and ruin it, or you can see a heaven in it. If you can appreciate the existence of vast truths in the smallest of things, you can gain knowledge and enlightenment that stays with you throughout life. If we teach our grandchildren to protect the most vulnerable animal, they understand to protect the most vulnerable human. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. It's close to practicing medicine. Except now we care for the plants and the animals and the land and water and just gently guide the ranch. Restoring a habitat is like helping a sick patient get well. And what has this all done for me? Well, I thoroughly enjoy the total peace and quiet and solitude and being able to do just what I want to do without having to have a meeting about it. Every afternoon I go to our little restored house we call a Sunday house, spend a couple of hours just by myself, either reading or listening to classical music. Every evening, an hour before sunset, I drive or walk on a different road and just watch the ranch. I've thought about it all of my life. So what do I think is the future of our ranch, and what do I think is the future of land in Central Texas? Number one, the demographics. Texas is a private property state because it entered the Union differently than all other states. We have almost no federal public land. 1% of the population owns 95% of the land in Texas. 85% of the population, though, lives in the city and 15% in rural. 500,000 people a year move to Texas, 1,200 people a day. And the vast majority of these people have no idea of the difficulties of managing land in Texas. However, in my experience, the vast majority of these people really do want to do the right thing. But I think that the influx of people will overwhelm our counties. The land will continue to be more fragmented, smaller places, and I think our ranch is an exception. Secondly, 90% of the people do not go outdoors because it's uncomfortable. The average person in the United States spends 50 minutes a week outdoors, 50 minutes a week outdoors. 1/6 of the people in Texas are foreign born. And the Asian population has doubled in the last 7 years and is the fastest growing segment in Texas. Now, I have no idea what all this means and whether this is going to turn out good or bad for Texas. But this I do know, things are going to change. And third, I suspect that water management, native plants, isolation, solitude, that dark sky at night and the peace and quiet in the daytime will be important, and I think that will add value to our land. Fourth, the problem of getting scientific information out to the landowner. In my opinion, this is the biggest problem facing ecology today. How do we get this wealth of research information from our wonderful institutions and our agencies out to the landowners? Fifth, I believe that much of the value of the land is in its isolation, its quietness, its diversity of plants and animals, its intrinsic beauty and water. And sixth, I'm optimistic for our part of Texas. The new landowners, for the most part, really care about the land, and they want to do the right thing. Well, what can we all do? What can I do? I think it's impossible to predict the future of the ranch. We hope that what we're doing to our ranch is the right thing, but as always, it will be decades before we know that what we're doing is the right thing or not. Mother had 2 sayings that are applicable today. All you can do is launch your children, and then they're on their own. And secondly, as your children get older, you do not worry less about them, you just have less control. Take the children to the ranch. Take them there when they're young. Teach them about the ranch. Care for the wild plants and the wild animals and what's dangerous and how to keep out of trouble. And as they learn to care for the most vulnerable plants and animals, they will understand to care for the most vulnerable humans. Tony tells me not to worry about what happens to the ranch after we're gone. Our children and grandchildren, they'll make the right decision. The world will change so much, who can predict? Ecclesiastes comes to mind when I'm at the ranch. One generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. I measure success in many ways, but one of my greatest pleasures came when my granddaughter told me that one of her essays for college was about the ranch. We think we're doing the right thing when we see Todd and Liz and Albert and Marietta move to the ranch, build a house, move their business here, and raise their family here. Tony and I feel that we have done our best. Perhaps that's what the women and the men of the Colonel Burns would all say at the end of their lives. Perhaps the best legacy Tony and I could leave is when the grandchildren and their grandchildren may spend time on our ranch, that they think of Tony and me fondly. When we were young, Mother insisted every afternoon we put a quilt on the floor and rest for an hour. Each child was in a different room. We could read or nap, but we had to be quiet. I remember it was miserably hot. The windows were open. Hot Texas August breeze was blowing always from the south. Mother would go to her piano and practice for an hour, usually a Chopin that she was working on or one of her favorite songs. And one of her most favorite songs, if not her most favorite song, was Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. And every time I hear it, I'm back at the ranch, laying on a pallet, listening to my mother, Deanna Erksleben.
When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lane. When all the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a place behind the sun, just a step behind the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
I went to Vietnam on a troop ship, 5,000 men on a ship designed for 3,800. We sailed for 26 days, and I noticed that if I would lie on the deck and look up at the sky and blotted everything out, the sky and the clouds looked just like they did at the ranch. And for a few seconds, I could be back at the ranch. I did that many times in the worst times in the jungles in Vietnam. The day before we landed amphibiously, the commander ordered all 5,000 men at 3 p.m. on the deck for the final briefing. He had been to war before, and he simply said, "Tomorrow at 3 a.m., everyone up, ready to board their landing craft. Weapons and ammunition will be issued today. You'll go over the side at daylight, circle until all is ready, and then you will head for the beach. You will be dropped off a good ways out in the surf. We do not expect any resistance, but you must be ready." And then he paused for a long time to let it sink in. He turned to a young, tall, blond soldier standing quietly beside him, nodded and said simply, "Lieutenant." The young lieutenant, slowly in a beautiful tenor voice, sang "Danny Boy." But come you back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow, 'tis I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. When he finished, a hushed silence fell upon us. There was not a word or sound from those 5,000 men. The song transformed 5,000 men like nothing I have ever seen before or since. Until that time, we were all on a grand adventure. We were part of the mightiest army on earth, and we were going to war. That experienced commander, who looked like he surely was retirement age, was telling us that after tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same, and that many of us would die. And if we came home, home would be different, the country would be different, and we would be different. When the lieutenant finished singing, the commander stood quietly for several seconds, then slowly and straight from the heart, he said, "Good luck, men." Sometimes when I'm at the ranch, I feel just like every one of you when you are at your places. I look around and I just cannot believe that we live in such a wonderful, wonderful world. Yeah.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow, and I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But But when ye come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be, ye'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall hear those soft you tread above me, and all my grave will warmer, sweeter be, for you will bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to me. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, I love you so. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright, blessed day, the dark, sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I see babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. But I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Thank you very much. Thank you.